Hey everyone, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. We're dipping into some 70s TV today. Have you ever watched Fantastic Journey? From 1977, a very short-lived series. It was a mid-season replacement for a different sci-fi series that didn't make it. And this one really didn't make it. It didn't even make it through an entire half season, which is kind of a shame. It's a pretty fun, cool little show, although obviously it does have some flaws. The show begins with a boatload of people venturing into the Bermuda Triangle. Oh yes, the 1970s. We loved Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, Bigfoot, and the Bermuda Triangle. Oh boy, did we love all those things. So they're going in for an oceanographic study. Along the way, they encounter this bizarre phenomenon at sea. Sort of a glowing cloud that comes moving towards them, and it wrecks their boat, and they wind up marooned on a oh, wait a minute. No, that's not right. There we go. They wind up marooned on this strange island. This group of people soon encounter pirates. They encounter an Arawak native played by Jared Martin, who would go on to have a pretty prominent role on Dallas, and who, of course, turns out to be a man from the future disguised as an Arawak Indian. And in the end, they manage to escape from the pirates and so must embark on a fantastic journey across this mysterious island through a number of time zones, as they call it, not like our time zones. And as they do, so they can find a place that will let them get back home. So as I said, this was meant to be a 13-episode mid-season replacement, but it was canceled after 9 episodes. They already had the 10th episode filmed, so they did eventually show that one. The main point of all this is the series did not do very well, and this is a serious problem for a sci-fi series, because science fiction means special effects, crazy costumes. In other words, they're more expensive, and so they really have to nail it with the audience. They need to have good merchandising. And sadly, this show really didn't have either of those things. It also was up against the Waltons and Welcome Back, Kotter. So its prospects were kind of iffy right from the get-go. It would have really had to make a big splash. Now, within a couple episodes, several of the characters from the pilot are gone. And we get 3 characters remaining from the original pilot. I think they wanted just to get a smaller cast to help control costs and a more interesting cast. These 3 would be joined by 2 more from the island. We ultimately get something that's reminiscent of Star Trek, and maybe not accidentally, since DC Fontana was involved on this one. Small group of people encountering strange new civilizations, new worlds, and having to deal with problems in those places. Like Star Trek, all these places suffer some kind of imbalance, some kind of, extreme, and these problems are often stimulated or exacerbated by the presence of these strangers. And of course, with Star Trek, it's through Kirk's mind, really more than his muscle, that they manage to solve problems there, or at least extricate themselves from those problems. And in most of the cases on Star Trek, a personal connection to Kirk or some member of the crew develops, making the personalities particularly important to the show and to the plots and how they are resolved. So let's take a look at the personalities we get on Fantastic Journey. First up, we have Varian, played by Jared Martin, a man of the future with amazing abilities. We have Dr. Fred Walters, played by Carl Franklin, a doctor from 1977. Scott Jordan, played by Ike Eisenmann, a 13-year-old son of a famous scientist who was on the show earlier, one of the people that left early. Katie Saylor plays Liana, daughter of an Atlantean father and an extraterrestrial mother. She's kind of like super strong. Not like, crazy super strong, but she's easily the strongest person in the group. Has some other abilities, has a cat that she can kind of communicate with. And Dr. Jonathan Willoway, played by Roddy McDowall, rebel scientist from the 1960s, and a great addition to the cast. Always a big fan of Roddy McDowall. God, he did a lot of this kind of stuff back in the day. Executive producer is Bruce Lansbury. Now, he was a producer on Wild Wild West, Mission Impossible, Wonder Woman, Knight Rider, Buck Rogers. So he has some bona fides in terms of sci-fi adventure series. He also produced some episodes of Murder, She Wrote, which starred his sister, Angela Lansbury. The personality mix on the show is pretty good. There are two healers, which seems like maybe too much, and that would be Varian and Fred Walters. But they have different personalities, so it's not too bad. You got Roddy McDowall, who as Willoway, who's kind of the troublemaker in the group. It's kind of cool also that Liana is like the group's muscle. The second episode of the series is centers on Atlantium, which is ruled by this disembodied brain with the voice of Ray Bannon. So obviously I was a fan immediately. And he provides paradise for those who live above and kind of a living hell for the slaves who live below. So very much like Metropolis and many other stories. This episode brings Liana into the group. It's also where a couple other characters leave, going through some kind of a passageway to get back to their home. But the group getting involved in solving the problems of this place makes that impossible for the others to get where they want to go. So they have to continue their journey. The third episode introduces Willoway, Roddy McDowall. He is like this sort of villain who controls this utopia of androids. Great character, like I said. He helps drive the action quite a bit. You know, you're never quite sure whose side he's on exactly, his own people or whoever he can get the most out of in one of the time zones that they visit. Episode 4 has a society of children dominated by a bully, maybe a little bit similar to the Star Trek episode Miri. We get John Saxon in episode 5. He would be he plays a would-be conqueror of the different time zones. We also get this really weird furry creature in this one. Volcanoes, human sacrifice, and love potions figure into episode 6. Also notable, she was also pretty prominent on Dallas when it would pop along, I guess in a couple years after this. Funhouse, episode 7. Weird one. It's kind of crafted around an amusement park that they were able to film in, a lot of stuff on set, but it's pretty fun. Turnabout features a time zone that is ruled by these domineering men, but their women manage to trap them in sort of this extra-dimensional prison and take over. And of course, they mean to do the same thing to the guys in the group, even though they're, haven't shown themselves to be domineering or evil. Episode guest stars Joan Collins, who did a lot of genre stuff back then. She was in Batman as a siren. She was in an episode of Space 1999. And it was really not too far away from starring on Dynasty. So her star was getting ready to rise quite a bit. Episode 9, we lose Liana. Katie Saylor was too ill to film the episode. And of course, she wasn't going to be well enough to get back before the series was canceled. And it's all about illusions and fear, and apparently takes place in the home of Darren and Samantha Stevens. Although that's what I read, and I look at that and I go, might be the same set, but they did change it a little bit. So not 100% sure if that's actually true. The final episode actually has a pretty impressive list of guest stars. You got Lou Ayers, and if you don't know who he is or haven't read his biography, you should take a look at it. Very interesting guy. Cheryl Ladd, Richard Jaeckel, Nicholas Hammond, Gerald McRaney. It involves these travelers from the future who crash their saucer into the island, because of the Bermuda Triangle kind of effect. And a couple criminals get away, including one particularly evil, and they make their way into this community of pacifists. So really the worst possible place a violent criminal could get into. Of course, Cheryl Ladd would very soon be seen on Charlie's Angels. Hammond would jump onto The Amazing Spider-Man, and McRaney, of course, would be on Simon & Simon, and much later Major Dad. But here he meets up with Richard Jaeckel, who would eventually be on Spencer for Hire, and he comes to a very sticky end. Lou Ayers, who I mentioned before, he played Dr. Kildare in the 1930s in a series of movies that are pretty fun. And interesting, he was a pacifist who enlisted in the Army during World War II and served as a medic. So he wouldn't have to hurt anybody, and he could actually just tell people. So like I said, very interesting guy. The show, for the most part, did well with the budget that they had. The special effects are never absolutely incredible, but they definitely get the story across. And they also didn't have much time for series development. So, again, it's a flawed series. It's very much a late 70s, early 80s sort of sci-fi adventure show. It looks like a lot of the shows from that period. But, I think they did a great job putting it together with the time and the money that they had. Many of the sets look like, modern shopping malls, which is fine with me because I'm very nostalgic about that kind of thing. And the prop design, not groundbreaking, but, pretty cool, pretty fun. And you cannot escape the fact that you are in the 70s. Check out those bell-bottom pants on Dr. Franklin there. The characters are pretty good. They're well enough acted, but well enough and pretty good are not necessarily the recipes for a really successful sci-fi series. The plots and the concepts are somewhat well-worn. We've seen this kind of stuff before. We'll see it again. I don't know that I came away from most of them thinking, wow, I never thought of that angle before. But again, not bad. And there is some creativity to the series. It was just probably not enough that it was going to make it a really successful series. The very mellow Varian was probably not the best leader for the group. On Star Trek, the Captain Kirk character, he worked because of the sort of struggle between logic and emotion, which are personified by Spock and McCoy usually. And you have those two sides arguing, with Kirk in the middle, and he has to come up with some way to, rather than just take one side or the other, to sort of find a solution that works for both sides. Maybe not the absolute best possible solution, but the best he can come up with the time and the resources he has. Varian is probably a little bit too zen, a little too highly evolved to have that sort of interesting struggle, with what he should do. Roddy McDowall is probably the most fun character in the group, probably the most charisma. Saylor does a nice job as Liana, though. Carl Franklin, he provides a good grounded emotional take, and sometimes he's a little bit hot-headed, which helps drive things. Essentially, you kind of get logical Liana and Varian versus emotional Walters and Willoway in the episodes, which isn't bad, but without that sort of lead character in the middle, like the focus who has to make the decision, I think it maybe makes them a little bit weaker narratively than they otherwise could have been. I've watched the series a couple times. I've enjoyed it both times. I think there's maybe some other aspects of the Bermuda Triangle they could have brought into this, maybe more historical. Most of the people that are met are sort of from the future rather than from the past. And I would have thought the past offers you the opportunity to use existing costumes and existing props and would maybe help save some money, but they didn't really do too much of it. I think also a recurring villain who's kind of putting a little pressure on them as they move through these different time zones, that might have helped as well. Kind of like the Logan's Run TV series, which also didn't really do all that well. But, or like The Fugitive, something like that. Something to put a little more pressure on them as they move through the time zones. But sadly, they didn't have that. They didn't manage to get that audience they needed, and they sort of, after 9 episodes, plus one later, they kind of disappeared. It's really kind of sad, because I think there was a lot of good to this series, a lot of good to the characters. Like I said, the actors did a pretty good job with it, with what they had. It's one of those, man, if they had more money, man, if they had more time, what could they have come up with? There were some interesting concepts, but I think the time crunch is what really killed them probably more than anything else. I don't think they had the time to really sufficiently develop what they wanted to develop. But for you out there, if you've never watched it, it's a pretty easy series to get through. I managed to find them on the internet. I think there's a DVD set out there, which I'd kind of like to get, to be honest, because the quality of the ones that I was watching online were not super great. So I'd like to see them cleaned up. But you only got 10 episodes. Well, you got the pilot, which is kind of like 2 episodes. So maybe in a way it's like 11, but you don't have a lot of episodes to go through. So give it a try. It's very 70s. If you have that nostalgia factor going, you might dig it. You get Roddy McDowall. Katie Saylor is actually, pretty hot, and probably would have been one of those sci-fi, women that guys still gush about to this day, like, Aaron Gray on Buck Rogers, had the series gone on a little bit longer. But either way, pretty good series, worth a watch, a lot of nostalgia. And I know there's a lot of folks out there who really, really love this from back in the day when they first saw it on TV. So give Fantastic Journey a try. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by it. But let me know what you think. If this is a series that you know, that you love, or maybe a series that disappointed you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. If you enjoyed this little review, I'd appreciate a like. You might think about subscribing, sharing with a friend. That would be really groovy. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And, watch Fantastic Journey. And hopefully I'll see you again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.